Got some cool new music to talk about this week, kids, along with a couple of mild rants about girl bands and about people who are just freaking negative online. And I got a podcast recommendation and a life lesson courtesy of no less than Formula One driver Sergio Perez. It's going to be a fun one, kids, and we'll get to it on the other side.
Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay.
I sent a message last week to our old pal Jay. Jay, who placed a merch order last week, and thank you very much for that, Jay. The message was not about that. I sent him a message, and the message said, if I wasn't already on my ass, this would have knocked me there. And the this in question was the video for the single The Dark Tower by a band called Burning Witches, okay? Burning Witches is a Swiss power metal, heavy metal band, and I am loath to use the term all-girl band. You know, I have twice in my career interviewed the great Morgan Lander of Kitty, okay? And during one of those interviews, I said to Morgan, now Kitty is held up as perhaps the quintessential all-female heavy metal band, right? And so when I was interviewing Morgan one time, I said, you know, it doesn't interest me all that much that you were an all-girl metal band. And Morgan just lit up. And she said, thank you very much. Thank you for not caring so much that we were an all-female heavy metal band. And I think it's time that we dispense with being even aware that there's an all-girl anything, really, because haven't we come? I mean, Kitty came out over 20 years ago. Have we not had enough time now? Do we not have enough in the bank to say it's not such a big or interesting deal that a bunch of girls can come out and shred and freaking rock and pound and crush your dang skulls? Like, do we need to comment on this anymore? Probably we're coming to a point where it's like politically incorrect to even freaking say it, but I don't think we need to say it at all anymore. They are a band. They shred. They play great. And yeah, they happen to be girls, but that's not really a talking point. Except, in the case of Burning Witches, it was an intentional sort of thing. Okay, when this band, as I understand it, when this band was started several years ago, the idea was that we want to put together a band that's all girls. And so that was part of the concept. That was part of the mission. I don't know that that was a political statement or just something novel. It's not even that novel anymore. Just something that they wanted to do. I mean, we had Vixen. We had Vixen in the freaking 80s, okay? And I remember that. I remember Vixen being singled out for being an all-female, at the time, I guess, hard rock, glam metal band. And I think it's really funny to acknowledge Vixen as being in some way special for being an all-girl band, when all of the bands looked like girls anyways. All they did was look like everybody else, except they had, you know, different stuff under the hood. And I don't think it's necessary anymore to point out the relevance or value of a band with respect to their genitalia, okay? Incidentally, if you want to go another layer deep on this, King's X has a song called Jenna. King's X has a song called Jenna, and the chorus is genitalia something. And I can let you in on a little insider secret. They were in the studio or whatever, they were writing this song, and they were just messing about with lyrics, and Doug or somebody said, I don't know, it should be like genitalia something. Big laugh, ha ha ha. Well, guess what, kids? It is. Genitalia something. Genitalia something. That's the lyric they kept. There's your inside scoop for the day. Vixen was a big deal for being an all-girl band. Okay, I guess that was something of a novelty, I guess, at the time. And I like Vixen, and they're still going, by the way. And Roxy Petrucci kicks holy A on that drum kit, and yay Vixen, right? Now we fast forward 30 years-ish from that. Do we still need to comment that a band is all female or not all female? I think it's been well established by now that girls, or those who identify as girls, are every bit the players, the singers, the writers, the performers, as the men are. I don't think we need to distinguish this anymore, but again, in the case of Burning Witches, that was a deliberate concept. It was part of the formation of the band, and so I guess it's cool to say, by the way, Burning Witches is an all-female power metal band from Switzerland, and they recently dropped this single called The Dark Tower, which is the title track from an album coming out in May called The Dark Tower, the most recent by Burning Witches. And I gotta tell you, man, this song is so freaking fun. I know. It seems strange to say that a song called The Dark Tower by a band called Burning Witches would be fun, but it is. If, like me, you grew up in the 80s listening to Exodus and Testament and Slayer and Megadeth and some of these bands, because this tune by Burning Witches is a complete and utter throwback. Just riffy. The guitar tones are even 80s thrash guitar tones, really. And so we've got this really amazing song with just chugging riffs, so heavy, and yet at the same time, so melodic. And you think, well, this is freaking really cool. And then something happens that takes really, really cool to super freezing, man. And that is when the singer, I believe it's pronounced Laura Guldemond, I think that's how you say it. Laura comes in, and you're like, what am I hearing right now? Some people are just so incredible. And this woman comes in with a voice that is so freaking huge and powerful and operatic and melodic. And just this tune just freaking cranks, man. I'm not kidding. Were I not already on my ass with the back spasms, this stuff would have knocked me there. It is already leading the race for my song of the year, The Dark Tower by Burning Witches. And I'm just so impressed. I'm just so impressed by people who can sing like this girl can sing. I'm amazed by that because I can't do it. And I wish so hard that I could sing the way this girl can sing. And I know there's probably technique involved in this, right? And experience and whatever. But this is just fundamental foundational talent. Some people just have extraordinary talent for things. And this girl can just wail, man. And I love that stuff. I love that stuff. And when you layer that, when you set that voice on top of a song that is just so freaking cool, man, Burning Witches, I have not dug into this band whatsoever. This is really my first exposure to them. Pretty sure I've seen their name on festival posters, that kind of thing. But I don't normally these days go in for a lot of metal or a lot of power metal, that kind of stuff. It's just not really where my head's at. Most of the time, if I'm listening to music these days, it's in preparation for a gig, right? And I live pretty firmly in the singer-songwriter world now, the folk rock, whatever. That's kind of where I live, all right? In the Americana zone a lot of the time. Because as a player, that just seems to be where I fit. So I'm usually sampling stuff I gotta learn, and then I don't get a lot of time for new stuff. And then once in a while, though, in prep for this podcast because I am beginning to veer back into the music as a focus. So I go around listening to new stuff, and I listen to a lot of new stuff that just doesn't interest me whatsoever. Got to be honest about that. Once in a while, though, along comes a tune like this that just perks me right up. And so I have not listened to a lot of Burning Witches. I have not been exposed to that. It's not really the world I live in anymore. But man, you can bet your butt, if you're knocked on it, that I will be listening to The Dark Tower by Burning Witches, and I'll be going into their back catalog too, because this band is so cool. And if you like old school guitar sounds and old school kind of thrashy riffs, you know what I'm talking about. Those ones that just, as soon as it started playing, like 5 seconds in, I can just feel it's time to mosh. It's time to headbang. This is like an Anthrax song. This is like a Slayer song. But then, big, epic, melodic chorus, really hooky. You know, kind of old school guitar sounds, but modern production. Modern sounds at the same time. And you know those riffs I'm talking about. If you're around in the 80s, those chugging riffs, man, like something off a Slayer record. So freaking great. But then this voice comes in and you're like, we're in new territory here. And I really, really love this song. I really, really love this song, man. That does not happen often. And I listen to it and I freaking smile. And I know it seems strange. To be smiling at something called Burning Witches, but it's so old school and so new school at the same time. Just epic. Go and listen to The Dark Tower by Burning Witches. This band is so freaking cool. And it's nice to discover something. You know, it is nice to just find something new where you go, oh, I love that. You know, I hear stuff all the time where I'm like, that's pretty cool. Yeah, okay. I'll never listen to that again. But once in a while, you just stumble upon something. And this was another kind of recommendation off of the YouTube sidebar, you know. Sometimes you see a thumbnail and you look at it and it just like, it clicks. It's like, again, an intuitive thing. And it's like with Martin Miller a couple weeks ago. It's like, you just like something in there. Something I got to check out in there, you know. And I opened that up and it was just so great. And I smiled, man. I smiled so hard. And it was just fun to hear that song. And I've listened to it a bunch. And Laura Goldemond is a freaking beast in the best possible sense. I've watched a bit of live footage. They got the look down. They got the stage presence down. They're all great. They are all great players. Just freaking great players. This is a really, really good band. This is a really good and technically gifted band. And then they write these just big, epic power metal tunes. Great, great, great freaking stuff. So get on the Burning Witches, okay? Go and enjoy this because it's so much freaking fun. And we need a little fun. We still need a little fun, you know? I've been watching my Facebook memories over the past week or so, and this is it, man. We are on the 3-year anniversary of when the first lockdowns started. You know, 3 years have gone by. Now, 2 of those were full-on pandemic years, so it has not been that long since we've come out the other side, and everybody I freaking know has had COVID again. I suspect perhaps even I had it, you know? And it's just taking me back at the time, the first part of the lockdowns, I started writing this series on my website called the COVID Diaries. And I did 4 little blog entries about the early days of the pandemic and the weird stuff that was not available at the grocery store. And I don't even like to think about this, you know, because it just makes me tense. And it makes me think back to those insane freaking times. And we're only now, perhaps not even now, really beginning to get the ramifications. But I think we can look around and agree stuff has freaking changed, man. I am reading, there's a kerfuffle with ticket prices. Why are ticket prices so freaking expensive now? Like what happened? And then I'm reading stuff about bands not selling merch anymore at shows because venues are taking such a steep cut of the merch sales that it's not freaking worth it. And then I'm hearing about other places where there are bars or clubs or whatever outside of venues that are contacting bands and saying, hey, put your merch in here. We will host your merch table. No cut required. Just send your people in here. They can have a drink. They can buy a freaking t-shirt. Like, bands are struggling so hard to make tours work at a certain level. They can't find tour vehicles. They're too freaking expensive. If they do, gas is expensive. Venues want a cut of their merch. That's why t-shirt prices are going up, 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 up. And it's like this weird kind of assault on the live entertainment industry. I heard somebody trying to get her hands on tickets to see Bill Nye the Science Guy. And tickets were like $400. And the gouging is insane. The gouging on groceries, the gouging on gas, the gouging on freaking tickets. Venues want 25 to 50% of your merch sales. It's just gone off the freaking rails, And we continue to live with the fallout from this pandemic. And all of this really started 3 years ago, and it's coming back in my memories. And I'm remembering the first time I went to the grocery store. And I walked up to the door, and the kid at the door wearing like full hazmat. It's like, you can't come in, man. Look down the way here. Look down the sidewalk. And there's people lined up, 2 meters in between, all the way down the front of the plaza. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. People got the masks on. It was apocalyptic. It was awful. And, you stand in line. And then in the early days, 3 years ago right now, in the early days, they said, you better get home and then take all your groceries out of the packages and wash all of your produce. And I got pictures of the produce in the kitchen sink. And it took like 3 hours to do groceries, and it was this weird tension. And you're in the store, it's like they nod and in you go. Everybody's got the mask on. And hail to the employees. Hail to the employees at your supermarket, any of the places that stayed open as essential services, because those people were in the line of fire. And we didn't know. All right, we did not know at the time what we were dealing with. People look back now and they say this is a huge government overreaction, and it was the global reset and all this stuff. It was all planned, and the governments were in cahoots. A lot of collusion, folks. We didn't know. All right, 3 years ago, right now, all we knew is that there was a pandemic starting. There was a virus killing people. We didn't know the nature of the virus, really. We didn't know what to do about it. All right. And we didn't know. We didn't know if we had a plague happening. We didn't know if we had Spanish flu happening that killed 50 million people 100 years ago. We did not know what we were getting into. And so blaming governments for shutting things down at that point in time is, I think, a little unfair and a little short-sighted, okay? But hail to the people who were forced to keep working, who put themselves in a level of danger that we didn't know at that point. It turned out to be not as bad as they trumped, no pun intended, as they trumped it up to be. But at the time, we didn't know that. And so hail to those people who kept working in that freaking madness. And I just think back to it now, and it's wild. And I look at how things have changed. The cost of rent, the cost of housing, the cost of everything. We're dealing with a fallout now that is really, really tough. And I'm thinking back to those days, and I don't want to. I don't enjoy thinking back to those days. But I do now because they're coming up in my Facebook memories, and I just shudder. It's like, what were we dealing with? And what is the collective trauma? It's just beginning to leak out probably now. And we look around, at least I do, at a world that is in many ways utterly changed. And so it's good when, as a slight compensation for that, as a way of coping just a little bit with that, you can look at a song by Burning Witches and you can smile and you can throw back to the 80s and you can bang your head and you can be like, yeah, man, music still has that power. We might not be able to afford to go and see the show anymore. And I don't know who can. I don't know who's paying $5,000 to go to a stadium show. It's freaking madness. But if you can just turn on a song like The Dark Tower by Burning Witches and feel that, that's pretty freaking cool, man. Now, if that is not your bag, all right, if you are not into the power metal and the epic choruses, and the big, powerful, screeching vocal of Laura Goldemond. But you still kind of dig on the old school flavor. I'm going to point you at the new single by Sweet and Lynch, okay? That is You'll Never Be Alone. What is Sweet and Lynch? That is a collaboration by Michael Sweet of Stryper and George Lynch of Dokken. Two guys from back in the 80s who remain very, very busy and super prolific, man. Michael Sweet, I don't know what's going on with that guy, man. He's been taking his songwriting juice because Stryper is banging out like a record every year, and good records, by the way. Some of their best records have been released in the past 4, 5, 6 years. Heavy, really catchy, really melodic, but I mean, they are not slowing down remotely. They're still playing great. Michael Sweet's voice remains a freaking miracle at 60 years old. That dude is hitting almost too many notes, almost too many high notes. It's like, dude, chill. You don't have to hit them all every song, you know, but he's still doing it at a time when a lot of singers from that era can't sing at all, let alone with that kind of power. He still sounds like he did. It's crazy. If anything, there's a bit more edge in his voice now that there used to be, you know? And so he's doing that. He's knocking out solo records, and he's doing these records with Sweet and Lynch. George Lynch, still going around being George Lynch and doing KXM records with Ray Luzier and Doug Pinnick. And they're just in the scene really, really prolifically. And there's a group of guys now from back in the day who are just everywhere, you know? And Michael Sweet and George Lynch are two of them. And so they have collaborated on this project they call Sweet and Lynch. They've done 2 full-length records, Only to Rise in 2015 and Unified in 2017. And they have another record coming out for which they have released this song, You'll Never Be Alone. Now, I have sampled the first 2 records, both really critically acclaimed, by the way. I mean, Sweet is still singing great. George Lynch is still playing great. And, I mean, Michael Sweet is a master of hooks. He is a master of choruses. And some people just have that ability, you know? I have worked with songwriters who just have an ability to write a chorus with hooks, and I'm very envious of that because I can't do it very well. Michael Sweet is a master of it, and so these tunes are hooky, and on the earlier records, there's a bit of a throwback sound. You know, it's metal-ish from the 80s kind of vibe, a little bit outdated, but this new tune, You'll Never Be Alone, I haven't loved the first couple of records, okay? And I have not gone deep on them, but I haven't loved them because I don't think I have time. This begins to happen, you know? I just don't have that much time to dig in on a lot of new stuff. And so I've sampled them, but not gone deep. Maybe if I went deep, I would be more into them. I'm not sure. There's just so much out there right now. You know, the internet has made it more possible than ever for bands at all levels to get their music out there and have it heard, which is great. The other side of that is that there's so much out there, you just can't get to everything and you can't go deep on everything. So I haven't. Maybe the record's great. I like the new song, You'll Never Be Alone, though. And it's interesting because these are 2 vintage glam metal artists. You know, when you look at a dude who walks by, you know, you go to a concert by one of these bands that's still around. You know, you go to a Def Leppard show, you go to a Tesla gig, whatever, Tom Kiefer, whoever's still out there playing. And there's always a dude who's got a mullet that's probably gray now, and he's wearing a jean jacket or like a denim vest, right? And on the back of that vest, you will see this at Steel Panther shows as well, there will be all of the patches. Remember back in the 80s, you had patches, and every band, as part of their merch, would release patches that you could sew on, and it's the band's logo, right? And so when you see that jacket at the show, and you will see it at every one of those shows, 2 of the bands that are on that jacket are Dokken and Stryper, okay? This is the level that these cats were at from the 80s. And so when you hear this song here in 2023, You'll Never Be Alone by Sweet and Lynch, you kind of expect that sort of sound, but you don't really get it. What you get is almost a Stone Temple Pilots vibe, actually. So the way the guitar sounds on the intro, it's really swampy. It's really swampy. You know what I mean? Just this really cool intro. And then this riff kicks in that is just swanky, swampy. And I don't know how else to describe it. And it is so catchy. I love the guitar riff on this tune. And then it's always a little bit disorienting for me to hear Michael Sweet sing something that isn't Stryper. Stryper has a very unique production. Stryper has a very unique sound. Nobody sounds like Stryper. And I don't mean that nobody writes songs like Stryper, although not many do. I mean the actual way the guitars sound and the drums sound, it's very signature. It's very unique. And the voice that fits with that is Michael Sweet's voice, which is also very unique and very distinct, okay? And so to hear it on a song that doesn't sound like a Stryper song, it's a little bit jarring to me. It's a little bit disorienting. It's not that it's not great, and he still is just hitting those notes and singing his lungs out with so much power. I mean, he's got still, at 60 years old, the full freaking power that he always had. Why is that? Well, I think it's partly lifestyle. And I think it's technique, and I think it's just keeping it up. You know, he has not stopped singing, really, since back in the day. And I think a lot of bands from the 80s, early 90s, who had such virtuosity in their singing, I think a lot of those bands, you know, they got dropped by their labels, the scene changed, there was nobody coming to the shows anymore, the bands split and went away. And then 20 years later, I think a lot of those singers haven't been singing. Right? And they've lost that, whatever they had. It's like a muscle, man. And I think a lot of them just lose it and really have a lot of trouble getting it back. Or they probably sung their lungs out with poor technique all the way through that, and their voices are just shot. Or they just smoked and drank too dang much and killed their vocal cords. And they just got older. You know, things degenerate. But if you hold on to it, the way I think Michael Sweet has, and Robin McAuley has, and Glenn Hughes has, and some of these cats, it's still there. And in his case, it is. And it's really kind of a miracle, man. Really, really powerful. And so he sings great on it. But for me, it's weird to hear him singing a song that doesn't sound like a Stryper song, right? But there's something just so hooky and freaking catchy about this tune. I really, really like it. I wrote down that the riff is infectious. There's a little intro section. Sounds like Stone Temple Pilots, all right? It's got the guitar sound like something from, you know, the early STP stuff. And it's got that sort of chording happening. And then it kicks into this riff where I wrote down LA Guns, Faster Pussycat. All right? Do we need to do a refresher on the late 80s, early 90s LA sleaze metal scene? Sleaze was a subgenre of glam, all right? And the poster boys for it are Guns N' Roses, all right? So late 80s, early 90s, the glam sound has become very, very, very produced, all right? Like too produced, thinking Def Leppard here. So a lot of this music is sounding way too clean, way too produced, almost impossible. And so along come Guns N' Roses with Appetite for Destruction. And the selling point for Guns N' Roses is that this was just so raw, right? This did not sound produced in the same way. This sounded raw. This sounded dirty. It looked dirty. It looked sleazy. And so Guns N' Roses were kind of the poster child for this new sleazy sounding, sleazy looking, way less produced, way more raw rock and roll vibe, right? And so LA Guns was that. Makes a lot of sense given the history of Guns N' Roses and LA Guns. And Faster Pussycat was part of that. And there was a whole subgenre of these just dirty, swampy looking mofos coming out, playing these badass, raw sounding. It was really like it was a new start, you know? It was a new start getting away from this overproduced stuff back into this dirty rock and roll stuff, man. Almost had like a 70s throwback. So this riff on You'll Never Be Alone sounds like an LA Guns or Faster Pussycat sleaze metal vibe to me, which is not Stryper. All right, despite what they tried to do on their Against the Law record, this is not Stryper. It's not Dokken either, all right? Dokken are the poster children for like mid-'80s glam rock. You know, before it really kicked in with your Poisons, etc., there was this period of time, 84 to 86, 83 to 87, where it was Dokken, where it was Crocus, I think, where it was Motley Crue, where it was Twisted Sister, where this was the sound. This was the look. And then it sort of caught on and blew up and became really, really kind of overdone until Guns N' Roses came along, right? Dokken were the poster children for that. And it was not grunge or sleaze sounding. Very riffy, and Dokken is great. Dokken was great. Love the Dokken, man. This does not sound like Dokken or sounds like Stryper. It sounds like Stone Temple Pilots, at least until Michael Sweet does that first scream, and then you're like, oh, we're not doing grunge here. Then this sleazy LA Guns Faster Pussycat riff that it just hangs with you, man. It just hangs with you. You go listen to this tune. When it's over, whether you dug the song or not, that riff is going to be in your head. And that is the mark of a successful riff, man. So I really, really like it. But it's funny because they got in trouble for this song. They got a backlash on this song already because it comes down to guitar solo time. And you got George Lynch. You've got Michael Sweet, who is himself a prolific and freaking dynamite lead guitar player. A real heavy metal lead guitar player, Michael Sweet is. Doesn't get a whole lot of credit for that, and he probably should. But you've got George Lynch. George Lynch is one of the guys. All right, you talk about Eddie, you talk about Nuno, you talk about Vi, you talk about Satriani. There's kind of this level. And then after people get through saying those names, they go, hey, don't forget George Lynch. All right? George was a guitar god in the 80s. He remains so now. And so it comes down to guitar solo time on this tune. And George does something that is not in any way spectacular. It's like a really simple, subtle, almost anti-guitar solo. And then they go back into the double chorus out. And people lost their minds. It's like George Lynch is phoning this in. George Lynch isn't even trying. Like, what are they doing? Like, why are they even bothering? You know what I mean? Like, people went nuts because George didn't shred this guitar solo to the point where Michael Sweet is posting on his Instagram a defense of George Lynch. And a don't worry, everybody. George rips on the rest of the album. You know what I mean? It's like they accuse George Lynch of just being lazy. And I don't think that's super fair. I understand it. It is kind of a dull guitar solo. Does it work within the context of the song? I don't know, because I don't even really remember what it was. I just know that it was only about 4 notes, and then off we went again. It's just not something that stood out to me at all, as opposed to Nuno's solo in the new Extreme song that was so spectacular that there are now reaction videos to it. You know what I mean? Caused a big stir, that solo, right? George doesn't do that. And I don't know about the decision making there. And Michael Sweet's coming out and lay off George. Trust me, he smokes on this record. And I don't know, the pressure that people are under and the complaints and the criticisms that people have to endure. The internet is such, at times, a frustrating place. I see this all the time. There will be a post about something. There will be a video of somebody playing. There'll be a video of somebody doing whatever. And just the snarky ass comments people make, just the complainy, judgmental, mean, snide. It makes me nuts. And it's like, I should take the advice of those people who say, hey, don't read the comments on stuff, because the comments are just full at times of people being such dicks. Why are people such dicks? And they really are. And people are being dicks about this too. I mean, you're entitled to have an opinion, of course. And you are free to express an opinion, of course. And if that opinion is rational and constructive, even if it's negative, cool. But people who turn up on the internet to be dicks for the sake of it and who are just snide, ripping on people who are freaking legends, you know what I mean? I don't like that about the internet, and it bothers me, and I probably take it too personally, even though it's not aimed at me yet. But I just get frustrated by people who make a point of being negative and judgmental and aggressive and stupid on the internet, when it's just as easy and about 1,000 times more mature to just shut your effing mouth or shut your effing fingers and move on. Like these people who have to be seen and recognized for having the negative point of view on this. You know what I mean? Who's had to be acknowledged, whatever. It's like, grow up. It's like, grow up, man. Just move on. You don't like it, then effing move on, Maybe that's too much to ask. And I shouldn't perhaps be ranting about that. All of that to say, yeah, George Lynch didn't light it up on the guitar solo in this song. Try to look past that. Go listen to the freaking song because it's cool, all right? I really like it. It is swampy. It's a little bit grunge. It's a little bit sleaze. And it is catchy. It is so freaking catchy. And that's cool. And I'm going to check out this record. I'm not sure the release date. I'm not sure the title. I do know that their previous records, it's been Sweet and Lynch performing, and bass played by James Lomenzo. Those of you who are around back in the day will recognize him from White Lion, and currently playing bass in Megadeth, so that's not bad. And drums by Brian Tichy. Brian Tichy is one of the guys, man. Brian Tichy has been kicking around the scene forever, playing on people's records, coming out touring. He's toured with Whitesnake, and he's toured with Billy Idol, and he's toured with Ozzy. He's just one of these guys. Brian Tichy is one of the guys in the rock world that gets called upon to play on stuff like these Sweet and Lynch records. Great player, total pro. And so, it's a cool band. I don't think they've done any touring. I think they should, If you can get Michael Sweet off the road with Stryper for 10 minutes, these guys should go out and tour. I think that would be pretty rad to see. And maybe George can stick it in the face of those people who whine that he didn't play enough notes on his freaking guitar solo. So check that out, all right? Check out Burning Witches. Check out Sweet and Lynch. I will put those, of course, on the John Huff podcast, referenced on the podcast playlist on Spotify. 2023, we are beginning to accumulate songs there, so go check it out. If this is your first foray into the podcast, go check out that playlist. You'll see about some of the stuff we've talked about along the way just this year. Then go look at the 22 list. Go look at the 21 list. There's a lot of music on there that you probably have forgotten or never knew in the first place. You might be introduced to your new favorite band. Before we go any further, and while I still have a voice with which to say it, I'm going to do the Patreon plug. Yes, there is a Patreon page for this podcast. It is patreon.com/John Huff Podcast, where for the low membership price of $5 a month, you can support the program. Think of it as tipping me $1.25 for every episode I do each month. If you came across me in a club someplace and thought, I would buy that cat a beer, I would buy that cat a cup of coffee, just to say, hey man, thank you. Thank you for the work you're putting into this program. If that's something you would do, you have the opportunity to do that via Patreon, okay? If you are inspired, entertained, educated, just like hearing a friendly voice in your ear holes once a week, then you can show me your appreciation by signing up to my Patreon, where I do occasionally put stuff that I do not put here. And, I keep intending to get back to that. A lot of my patrons don't seem to care too much whether I have extra content on there. This is a gesture out of the goodness of their hearts to say, look, man, we support you. We appreciate what you're doing. We know this takes work, and we appreciate the effort you put in, and we want to help you, and we want to support. And they do that via Patreon. Still, I do intend to give more value there in as much as I can. And if you are a patron and you have ideas about what I could put on my Patreon site that would just make your membership that much more fruitful for you, warm your cockles just a little bit deeper, please do drop me a line and let me know. It avoids me having to plug this podcast full of ads, and I hate ads in podcasts. They drive me freaking crazy. I hate turning on a podcast and having to sit through 5 minutes of ads, and then every 5 minutes having to sit through another 2 or 3 minutes of ads. It sounds a hell of a lot like commercial radio to me, kids, and we all know what's going on with commercial radio, which is why we listen to podcasts. So please consider patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. Don't want to do that? That's okay. The podcast will remain free and accessible wherever you enjoy fine podcasts. You can help me out by sharing these episodes. Not hard to do, helps me very much. If you like what you hear, if you're getting something from this, if you think other people will too, please share the episodes. Please tell your friends. You can follow me on Instagram at John Huff Podcast, Facebook, John Huff Podcast, TikTok, John Huff Podcast. I ask every week, please consider leaving me a rating and review on your preferred podcast platform, preferably a positive one. That is a tongue twister right there. Not going to try to do it again. Might hurt my jaw. Please just consider 5-star rating and a little review. It takes a minute to do it. Warms my cockles, helps the show. Work with that algorithm so other people will hear it too, Warms my cockles, feels good. That's enough of the plug for now. You can find the archive of episodes as well as my merch shop, t-shirts, mugs, some cool stuff, john-huff.com. And you can go to the shop. You can go to the podcast page. I have music up there that I've played on. So some of the artists I've talked about on here, Carly, Hearts, whatever. Some of that music is available to be heard on my website. So go scope that out. You got some time to kill. Want to go see that? There you are. john-huff.com. Going to stop plugging now. Time is going by. I got 2 things that I'm going to end with real quick, okay? First, I want to give you something inspiring. Want to give you an object lesson in the form of Formula One driver Sergio Perez. I am not a Formula One guy. I don't really understand the appeal of car racing. I don't get why there are $8 zillion to be had in the Formula One world, but I know this is hugely popular. And I kind of started to get into it when they released on Netflix the Drive to Survive documentary series, which is behind the scenes on the Formula One tour. All right, this is open wheel car racing. Those crazy, weird cars that go, 300 kilometers an hour down the straight and then occasionally crash into the corner. I don't get it. And yet the TV show, the Netflix show, is so freaking compelling. And they do such a really good job of pulling you into the personalities, pulling you into the rivalries, pulling you into what seems to be at stake. It's just extremely well executed television, right? And so our old pal Deuce tipped me off to this, and I started watching season 1. There's like 4 seasons now, and I got hooked. And then I watched season 2, and I watched season 3, and then all of a sudden, there have been 2 Formula One Grand Prix races this season, and I've watched them both. And I find myself halfway through going, why am I doing this? Why am I watching this? But once you begin to get to know the drivers and some of the big personalities behind this weird game, it just becomes compelling. It becomes something that you're interested in. And so we go to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, which was won on Sunday by the Mexican driver, Sergio Perez, in his Red Bull car, okay? Now, if you go back a few years, the notion of Sergio Perez even racing in Formula One again, let alone being on the podium, let alone winning a race, seemed very unlikely indeed, because 3 years back, Sergio is racing for a team called Racing Point, okay? And the way this works is that in Formula One, there are 10 teams, and there are 2 drivers per team. So what we're talking about is 20 jobs in all of the world. This is a very select, very elite level of driver, okay? There's only 20 of these cats on the freaking planet who have chairs, who have Formula One seats. Very, very competitive, okay? Now, Sergio is a veteran driver. He's in his 30s, been around a long time, won some races. A few years ago, he's driving for Racing Point. Racing Point is having a decent season, and Sergio himself is driving lights out, doing really, really well, okay? Now, the two drivers for Racing Point are Sergio and Lance Stroll, okay? Fine. What happens is we're getting to midpoint of the season, and suddenly Sebastian Vettel, former world champion Sebastian Vettel, legend, icon, leaves the team he's driving for and is looking for a new team. And doesn't Racing Point jump on Seb Vettel? Gotta have that guy. This guy's available. We gotta bring him in. Problem is, you bring somebody in, somebody's gotta go out. And you think, well, Sergio's driving great, and he's a veteran, and he's one of the guys, so Sergio's not going anywhere. And under normal circumstances, that would be true. Problem is, Sergio's teammate, the other driver for Racing Point, is Lance Stroll, son of Lawrence Stroll, who is the owner of Racing Point. So guess what, kids? Whether Lance Stroll can drive or not, he ain't going no place because his dad owns the freaking team. And what that means is that Sergio, respected, professional, accomplished, driving great, is going to be out of a chair come the end of the season. And it looks as though this kid's game is up. Now, he came from nothing, all right? All these guys started driving go-karts when they were old enough to get into a go-kart, like little kids. And this becomes a really expensive game and a difficult game. And we're getting to a point of 20 jobs in the whole freaking world. That's fewer than NHL starting goalies. That's fewer than NFL starting quarterbacks, okay? This is how elite this is. Sergio Perez comes from nothing. His family is poor in Mexico, drives his way all the way through up to being a Formula One driver and a good one. This is literally a rags to riches story, man. And it's all going to come crashing down because he ain't the owner of the team's kid. So Sergio Perez is going to be out of a freaking job in a world where there aren't many of them, right? And so he knows this is happening. This has become public. Vettel is joining Racing Point. Somebody's got to go. Obviously, it's going to be Sergio. And so we come down to the last few races of the season, and he's looking at it like, this is it. My freaking dream is done, man. After all I've given, after all I've accomplished, after all the work, my parents, my family, everything, I'm going to be out. And it's not fair because I'm driving really, really well and I'm good at this. And so he says himself, I'm approaching the end of my career here. The circumstances are not fair, and Formula One is not fair, and life is not fair. But I'm going to go hell-bent for leather. If this is my last 3 races, then screw it. I'm going out as high as I can. And this sucks and it ain't fair, but I'm going to do my best. And so what happens is, come down to the second last race of the season, they go the first lap. Sergio has like a little mix-up with somebody, gets knocked off the grid, and finds himself suddenly running last. And he's got to pit, and he's got to get his car fixed. And it's like, this is not the way I want to go out, right? So at a certain point in the first lap, Sergio is dead freaking last. And what does he do, kids? He's driving a good car. Racing Point has a good car. All Sergio does is come all the way freaking back. He passes freaking everybody, and then there's a mix-up with Mercedes. A few mistakes are made, allows a veteran, a savvy guy like Sergio to slide right in there. Sergio wins the freaking race, comes from dead last to first, up on the podium, standing on the car, that privilege you get when you win the freaking race. And it's just like, take that, Formula One. Sergio didn't ditch his team. Sergio didn't throw his toys out the pram, didn't throw a strop, just raced his ass off, did this amazing thing, coming from last to win a freaking Grand Prix. And what happens? What happens, kids? At the end of the season, Sergio's out of a job. His career is over, it seems, driving his ass off. And doesn't he get a phone call from Red Bull? Says, Sergio, we want you on our team. So it looked like the end, and it looked like circumstance, and it looked like the game of life was just going to spit Sergio Perez out. And what happens? The worst thing that could possibly happen to him, I'm out of a job, opens up a better job. Red Bull is a better team. You fast forward 3 years, Sergio Perez winning the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix in his Red Bull, and he's driving the best car. Red Bull is by far the best car this year. And if Sergio had not been spat out of Racing Point, in this very unfair and kind of cruel way, he never would have freaking landed, probably, at Red Bull, now driving the best car. Now, Red Bull's going to win the championship for sure. And it just goes to show you, man, in these weird circumstances where it seems like the worst thing is happening to you, sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you winds up being the best freaking thing that can happen to you. And it was great to see that illustrated by Sergio Perez winning on the weekend after a few years ago looking like the cruelest luck was ending his freaking career. It turned out to be an amazing boost. So if you got dumb stuff happening right now, if it ain't working for you, if some really unfair thing is going on, step back, man. Step back and say, maybe, and I've heard this from lots of other people who have lost a job or lost a spouse or whatever. In the end, that was the greatest freaking thing that could have happened to me. I've had to look at things that way myself, man, when I've lost gigs, whatever. It's like, in some way, this might be the best freaking thing. And I saw that, and I saw Sergio, and I thought, that's freaking cool, man. So hold on to that. Keep that in your back pocket, all right? One last thing before we go. You can't listen to my podcast all week long, so I frequently make other podcast recommendations. I am recommending this week the Christian Geeks Classic Rockcast. That ain't going to be for everyone, okay? But elements of my audience who have been with me since the 80s, who grew up in the world that I did, listening to Barren Cross records and Sacred Warrior records and Fear Not records and Guardian records. If you were into the Christian rock scene, into the Christian metal scene back in the day, do yourself a favor, check out the Christian Geeks Classic Rock Cast, where on every episode, they just pick up one of those albums from the 80s, 90s, and they just talk it out. So if it warms your cockles to think about listening to Angelica's Walking in Faith, or Guardian's Fire and Love, which for me, folks, was not as good as First Watch. I'm just saying, I much prefer the original Guardian to what Guardian became. Could be just me. But if that was your scene back in the day and you've forgotten about some of those records, you want to hear somebody talk about them, Steve Chalk, Britt Mooney, really good guys. I've been in contact. They're super friendly, and they were part of that world just like I was. And it's really fun to hear them just dissecting some of these old records and talking about them. So if you're into that, go check out the Christian Geeks Classic Rockcast. It will warm your cockles and bring back probably some fond memories. I'm going to keep following that podcast because they're talking about a lot of the formative music of my life. And now that I'm advancing in age, it's fun to look back and it's fun to remember some of that music. It's not fun to remember some of it too, by the way. Some of that stuff was pretty freaking goofy, but a lot of it was really cool. And, you have a sentimental attachment to it. So if you do, go check out the Christian Geeks Classic Rockcast. Okay, I am going to go. I'm going to shutting up. I still have lingering voice issues from the cold or whatever I've had over the last little while. We've held on just barely here. I appreciate you listening. Please do drop me a line. Tell me what you're listening to. Check out Burning Witches. Check out Sweet and Lynch. Let me know what you think. stuff you want me to talk about, stuff you want me to listen to, please do drop me a line, john-huff.com/contact, or hit me up on the socials. Please do follow. Please do share. And hey, good things happen when you put yourself out there. Remember that, kids. And I'll check you later. Yeah. You want me to try to sing some Burning Witches? 9, not going to happen, but do go check out that tune, man. They freaking rock.